In these problems, we are talking about sample space. And sample space is really just a fancy term for all the possible outcomes there can be in a situation. Let's look at this first problem. It says a coin is tossed. If a head appears, a spinner that can land on any of the numbers from 1 to 5 is spun. If a tail appears, the coin is tossed a second time instead of spinning the spinner. What are the possible outcomes? So, what they want here is a sample space. They want a list of all the things that could happen. Actually, let's start with the first thing. It's a coin tossed. You can either have heads or you can have tails that first time. If you have tails, you're going to toss the coin again, and that could either be heads or tails, and that's it. If you have heads, you spin a spinner and you get a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So there's a little bit of a chart to represent it. When we list a sample space, though, this is called a compound event. There's a couple events happening one after the other. Usually you list them like this. You would say it's possible to get a heads and a 1, or a heads and a 2, or a heads and a 3, or a heads and a 4, or a heads and a 5. And it's possible to get a tail and then a heads, or a tail and then a tail. And those are all of the things that could happen. So this is our sample space. All right, let's look at one more problem regarding sample spaces. This says if you select one of the 4 cards, so we've got these really tiny cards, and then we've got a giant 7-sided die. So you pick one of the cards and then you roll the die. How many possible outcomes are there? In this case, we don't need to list them all. We just need to figure out how many possible outcomes there are. And that's important because that's the bottom number for the fraction where you show probability. So we often want to know how big the sample space is. Well, in this case, if I pick a 0, then I would roll the die and there are 7 possibilities. If I pick a 1, there are 7 more possibilities. If I pick a 2, 7 more possibilities. If I pick a 3, 7 possibilities. So really, this is 4 times 7. And that is exactly how you figure out how big a sample space is. If you've got 2 events that are linked here, you take the number of the number of outcomes of the first one, number of outcomes of the second one, and you multiply. And in this case, you get 28. So there are 28 possible outcomes. So that is a little work with sample space.